Now to the economy here at home, where we're increasingly hearing the term Bidenomics to describe the current administration's economic policies. It's a term President Biden himself has begun to use when talking up his policies of centralized government, more state control, and if he gets his way, higher taxes. So are these policies what Americans need right now? Joining us now to answer that is David Nelson, BellPoint Chief Strategist and host of the Money Runner podcast. David, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so some of those who are old enough to remember Reaganomics would remember lower taxes, less regulations. President Biden says, forget that. That's trickle-down economics. I want to build the middle class out, not have, it coming from the top down. But that means higher taxes, more regulations. So what does that actually mean for the American people?
There's probably a pretty big split, both between the administration, Main Street, and Wall Street. Look, the key is whether or not these programs will work or not. The administration is making a very hard push that centralized government planning is the key to economic growth and prosperity. So if you buy into the idea that government can run things better than the private sector, you're going to love Bidenomics. But really, this has been policy really for the last couple of years. They just finally came up with a name for it.
You know, the interesting thing is President Biden, one of the things that he says is that building for this trickle-down economics, as he calls it, he says it hollowed out the middle class, but his plan would actually do the opposite. So is this a time for the middle class to rejoice, or how does it affect them?
Some will probably rejoice, and they'll obviously, the administration will get some support from his base. I think actually some of the progressive wing in the party will say that this doesn't even go far enough. But if government is going to run the economy, that means you need money. And if you need money, that means higher taxes. And that's going to be tough to sell going into an election year, especially with the poll numbers on the economy as low as they are.
Well, and as you hit that, CNN had a recent poll showing that 2/3 of Americans actually disapprove of Biden's handling of our economy so far. So this is going to be a tough sell for many people. But I do want to ask you about inflation. How will this affect inflation? Will it bring it down or make it go up?
It will likely push it higher, and it will force the Fed to push even harder than they are already. And that's really the split between Bidenomics and Wall Street. A lot of concerns that all the spending, like the CARES Act that we had in 2021, a lot of the spending that's going on in 2022, and likely some of the legislation that will come after this, will lead to further inflation. And that keeps the Fed very, very tight. And in the end, that's something we all pay for. If inflation is up there and they have to remain restrictive where they are now, we're likely looking at another Fed hike this month, possibly one the month after that. When rates are this high, everybody starts to feel it. Where I differ is the free market usually takes bad investments, bad ideas, and gets rid of them very quickly by forcing those companies out of business. Unfortunately, once an idea gets entrenched in government, it becomes nearly impossible to wind it down. It takes on a life of its own. There are employees, there's regulatory structure, unions. Once it gets turned on, you can't turn it off.
So let me ask you about this, because you talk about what the Fed may do. Many people look at the recent job numbers that weren't as cool as maybe the Fed would hope, signaling that that may make the Fed raise rates again. But something that President Biden keeps touting is all this job creation that he claims that he's been responsible for under his administration. So he's saying, I have all this job creation, but the Fed's saying, we want a cool job creation. We don't want it. So is he working against what the Fed is trying to do to lower inflation?
Yes and no. Let me put it this way. First, the Fed, in my mind, is embarking on a policy error. All they really need to do is stay where they are. Inflation is already coming down. Once the CPI printed last, I think the peak was last October is when we got last June was the peak. Been coming down ever since. If they just stay where they are throughout the rest of this year, they won't have to do much. A lot of what we're seeing in the jobs market, and the jobs market is still robust, there's still not enough workers to go around. There was a lot of disruption coming out of COVID. A lot of people took on jobs that were different than what they had before. They're reluctant to go back to some of the service jobs that they have right now. And yet we're not getting the coolness that the Fed would like to see. I think their fears are misplaced. I think if they just stay where they are, inflation will take care of itself.
Okay. As we end our program tonight, for our viewers, is there anything positive that you can share with them as we look at our economy?
Yeah, we have some secular growth drivers in the economy that are going to be with us for years to come. What's taking place in artificial intelligence and AI, it's not just about what's taking place in technology stocks. It's what's taking place in every company that's going to have to use it. Companies like John Deere, General Motors, all of them are starting to use this. It's going to make our lives better. It's going to make their top line and bottom lines better, and that'll be better for your investments.
Okay, got like that positive news. David Nelson, always good to see you. Thanks for being with us this evening.
Thanks so much, Lyndsay.